The birth of Rome. Long ago, along the gentle curves of the Tiber River, a small settlement began to grow quietly, almost hidden amidst rolling hills and soft forests. The morning sun would rise over the distant hills, casting a golden glow upon the river, where waterfowl glided silently across the calm surface. The air smelled faintly of fertile soil and blooming flowers, and the people of this tiny village moved through their days in rhythm with nature, unaware that one day their home would become the heart of an empire that stretched across continents. The story of Rome's beginning is wrapped in legend, whispered across generations like a lullaby of history. It is said that two brothers, Romulus and Remus, were born under extraordinary circumstances, the sons of a noble lineage and a symbol of destiny. Left in a basket upon the river's gentle currents, they floated softly until the river cradled them near the safety of the hills. There, a she-wolf discovered the infants, nurturing them with care and quiet devotion, as the forest and sky watched over them. As they grew, Romulus and Remus learned the ways of the land, climbing hills, exploring forests, and understanding the delicate balance between humans and nature. The boys shared a bond that was unspoken yet profound, a calm understanding of courage, curiosity, and patience. They dreamt of building a city that would endure through time, a place that could bring people together under laws, culture, and shared purpose. Eventually, a disagreement arose between the brothers, quiet yet filled with tension, over where the new city should be founded. Romulus favored one hill, Remus another, and both felt the pull of destiny upon their shoulders. The story tells us that Romulus ultimately prevailed, naming the city after himself, Rome, a place that would grow slowly, thoughtfully, and deliberately, as if each stone and street were laid with care for centuries to come. The first inhabitants of Rome were farmers, shepherds, and artisans, tending to their fields, flocks, and homes with patience and skill. Life moved at a gentle pace, guided by the rhythms of the sun and the changing seasons. Markets emerged, not crowded and noisy, but lively with the calm exchange of goods and ideas. Neighbors shared meals, stories, and songs, cultivating a sense of community and shared destiny. Each day, the settlement grew quietly, layer upon layer, stone upon stone, until it began to resemble a town that could someday hold greatness within its walls. The people of early Rome also respected the unseen forces of nature and divinity. Temples, simple yet serene, rose amid the hills, dedicated to gods and goddesses who watched over the land and its people. Priests offered quiet prayers and rituals, not for spectacle, but as acts of reflection and devotion. These sacred practices instilled a sense of continuity, a calm awareness that life was part of something larger, enduring, and profoundly interconnected. As the Tiber flowed gently past the growing settlement, carrying water, fish, and whispers of distant lands, Rome began to attract more people, drawn by the promise of fertile soil, flowing rivers, and a place where dreams could take root. Each stone laid in the streets, each hut built on the hills, and each harvest gathered in the fields added to the quiet strength of the city. Rome's foundation was not built in haste, but in patience, vision, and steady effort, qualities that would define its future, even as it grew into a great civilization. And so, the birth of Rome was not a single moment, but a slow unfolding, like dawn breaking softly over the hills. It was a story of care, courage, and curiosity, of children nurtured by wolves, of people guided by faith and community, and of a city rising quietly in the heart of Italy. The echoes of this beginning would ripple through time, shaping an empire, inspiring leaders, and creating a civilization whose influence would endure for centuries, inviting those who listen to reflect, dream, and drift peacefully into the story of history. The Roman Kingdom and Early Kings. As the settlement of Rome grew upon the gentle hills along the Tiber, a sense of order and community began to take shape. The early inhabitants recognized the need for guidance, not in the harsh voice of command, but through thoughtful leadership that balanced justice, care, and vision. It was the age of the Roman kingdom, a time when the city slowly transformed from a collection of homes and farms into a place with purpose, structure, and a quiet sense of destiny. The first kings of Rome were figures of legend, leaders who brought stability and wisdom to a fledgling city. Romulus, the founder, was followed by successors who continued to shape laws, build walls, and guide the citizens with foresight. Their reigns were not hurried. They were marked by deliberation, listening to counsel, and observing the needs of the people. Each decision, from the construction of the first bridges over the Tiber to the establishment of markets, reflected a balance of practical necessity and thoughtful care. Life in the early kingdom moved with the gentle rhythm of seasons. Fields of wheat and barley swayed in the breeze. Shepherds guided their flocks along soft hillsides, and craftsmen worked quietly in their workshops, shaping pottery, tools, and the foundations of a society. Families gathered at dusk, sharing meals, stories, and songs that had been passed down through generations. These moments, serene and ordinary, built the true strength of Rome, a city grounded in community, cooperation, and the enduring rhythm of daily life. The kings also understood the importance of laws, not as instruments of fear, but as guides to fairness and unity. They established early codes of conduct, ensuring that citizens knew their rights and responsibilities, and creating a sense of trust and harmony. Temples and sacred spaces dotted the city, providing places of reflection and devotion, where people could connect with the unseen forces of the world and find comfort in continuity and order. Among the early kings, some were remembered for their wisdom, others for their courage, and a few for their vision in uniting people and expanding the city. Numa Pompilius, for instance, was known for his gentle and thoughtful nature, emphasizing peace, religious observance, and the harmonious life of the city. His reign brought calm and spiritual reflection to Rome, balancing the bold foundation of Romulus with patience and foresight. The citizens of Rome, though small in number compared to the future empire, began to recognize the power of shared purpose. They worked together to build roads, fortifications, and public spaces, understanding that the strength of a city lay not in its walls alone, but in the cohesion, trust, and quiet diligence of its people. The Tiber flowed steadily past their homes, a reminder that life itself moved forward gently, carrying lessons, opportunities, and the soft whisper of history. Even in moments of challenge, whether disputes between families, conflicts with neighboring settlements, or the occasional hardship of harvest, the kingdom endured. The kings led with measured calm, guiding citizens with reflection, patience, and a steady hand. Each obstacle became a chance for learning, each success a quiet celebration of the growing city. By the time of the last kings, Rome had grown from a humble settlement to a small but thriving city, its streets beginning to take shape, its people organized, and its sense of identity rooted in both tradition and aspiration. The foundations of government, law, and culture laid during this period would echo through centuries, influencing the Republic, the Empire, and civilizations far beyond the hills of Italy. As night fell over Rome, the soft glow of lanterns illuminated quiet streets. Families rested. The river reflected the stars, and the city, though small, felt alive with potential. The age of the Roman kingdom was a gentle, formative chapter in a story that would stretch across continents, full of calm reflection, enduring lessons, and the promise of a civilization destined to leave its mark upon the world. The Roman Republic. After the era of kings, Rome quietly transitioned into a new form of governance, the Republic. The people, having learned from their early leaders, sought a system where the voices of citizens could guide the city, where decisions were shared, and where order was maintained through laws and civic duty. It was a time of balance, reflection, and steady growth, marked by the soft murmur of debate in the forums and the gentle rhythm of daily life across the hills and streets. The Republic introduced institutions that guided the city with thoughtfulness rather than haste. The Senate, composed of elder statesmen, provided wisdom and counsel. Consuls, elected from among the citizens, led the city with responsibility, overseeing both civil and military matters. Laws were codified to ensure fairness, and citizens learned the importance of duty, service, and cooperation. Rome moved like a carefully woven tapestry, each thread contributing to the strength and resilience of the whole. Daily life in the Republic flowed with calm consistency. Farmers tended their fields, observing the cycles of planting and harvest. Merchants traded in the bustling marketplaces, exchanging goods, stories, and laughter. Artisans shaped clay, metal, and wood, creating tools and decorations that reflected both skill and patience. Families gathered in modest homes, sharing meals, telling tales, and nurturing children who would grow up with the values of civic responsibility, courage, and respect for tradition. Yet Rome was not without challenges. The city faced internal conflicts between the patricians, the wealthy elite, and the plebeians, the common people. These tensions, though sometimes tense, were met with negotiation, compromise, and the steady guidance of laws. Tribunes were appointed to represent the plebeians, ensuring that the voices of all citizens could be heard. In this way, the Republic matured, learning to balance power, fairness, and the shared well-being of its people. As Rome expanded its influence across the Italian peninsula, the Republic demonstrated both strategic foresight and patience. Soldiers, disciplined and well-trained, moved methodically through distant lands, not rushing into conflict, but carefully observing, planning, and advancing with a calm determination. The city's reputation grew not only through military victories, but through its organization, laws, and the quiet integrity of its leaders. Education, culture, and religion flourished alongside civic duty. Children learned not only practical skills, but also the values of wisdom, courage, and service. Temples rose in honor of the gods, where citizens could reflect, pray, and find comfort in continuity. Festivals and celebrations marked the changing seasons, providing moments of joy and calm reflection amid the work of daily life. The Republic was a delicate balance of ambition and restraint, courage and reflection. Leaders guided without tyranny. Citizens participated with responsibility, and the city grew thoughtfully, brick by brick, law by law, and day by day. Rome's foundations during this period would carry forward into centuries of expansion, conquest, and civilization, echoing the lessons of patience, unity, and thoughtful leadership. As the sun set over the Tiber, casting long shadows across the city, Rome rested in quiet strength. The murmurs of citizens faded into calm, lanterns glowed softly in homes and streets, and the Republic, young yet steady, prepared for the centuries ahead. The story of Rome's transformation from kingship to republic is not merely a tale of politics. It is a gentle reflection on order, community, and the enduring human pursuit of justice, wisdom, and shared purpose. Daily life in ancient Rome. Beneath the grandeur of Rome's politics, armies, and monuments lay the true heart of the city, the daily lives of its people. While history often remembers emperors and battles, it was the quiet routines of farmers, artisans, merchants, and families that carried the rhythm of Rome forward, like the steady pulse of the Tiber flowing through the land. As dawn broke, the streets of Rome slowly came alive. The first rays of sunlight slipped across the rooftops, warming courtyards where children played quietly and families prepared for the day. Farmers led their animals out to graze or began work in their fields, their hands moving with practiced calm as they tended crops of wheat, olives, and grapes. In the city, bakers rose early, their ovens filling the air with the gentle scent of fresh bread. Merchants set out their stalls in the forum, arranging fruits, spices, and pottery with care, ready for the flow of buyers that would pass throughout the day. Homes in Rome reflected the diversity of the city. Wealthy families lived in spacious villas with courtyards filled with plants, fountains, and mosaic floors that shimmered in the sunlight. Their mornings began with quiet discussions, lessons for their children, and preparations for gatherings that might include neighbors or visiting friends. For the common people, life was simpler but no less meaningful. Modest apartments, called insulae, housed artisans, shopkeepers, and laborers, where families shared small spaces, laughter, and meals together. The walls might have been plain, but they echoed with warmth, conversation, and resilience. Children were the heartbeat of the home. Boys and girls learned from their families practical skills like farming, weaving, or pottery, but also the values of duty, respect, and curiosity. For wealthier families, education extended into lessons in reading, writing, and philosophy. For others, learning was found in the marketplace, in the fields, or by listening to the wisdom of elders who passed on stories of gods, ancestors, and Rome's history. Religion intertwined seamlessly with daily routines. Altars, both grand and humble, stood in homes, streets, and temples. Families offered simple prayers, lighting small fires or placing offerings of bread and fruit before the household gods known as the Lares and Penates. These quiet rituals gave comfort, reminding people that unseen forces watched over them, guiding their lives with gentle protection. Temples provided spaces of reflection, where the bustle of the city gave way to calm reverence, and citizens found peace in shared belief. Meals marked the rhythm of the day. Breakfasts were light, perhaps bread, cheese, or fruit. Lunches offered simple sustenance, while dinners, especially in wealthier households, became moments of gathering, storytelling, and connection. Reclining upon couches in the tradition of banquets, Romans savored dishes of olives, fish, and vegetables, accompanied by soft wine diluted with water. Even in humbler homes, meals were shared with gratitude, laughter, and a sense of togetherness. Entertainment filled the evenings, weaving joy into the fabric of Roman life. In grand amphitheaters, crowds gathered for performances, music, or athletic contests. In smaller spaces, neighbors gathered to sing, play games, or tell stories beneath the soft glow of lantern light. Children played in courtyards until the stars appeared, their laughter blending with the quiet hum of the city winding down. For some, evenings were spent in calm reflection, gazing at the night sky, where constellations told stories as old as time. Yet daily life was not without its challenges. Crowded streets, the noise of carts and traders, and the demands of labor often brought fatigue. But Romans endured with patience, carrying on their routines with resilience and quiet pride. The strength of the city rested not in marble temples or stone roads, but in the countless acts of ordinary people who woke each day to work, care for their families, and nurture their community. As night fell, homes grew quiet. Oil lamps flickered, casting a golden glow across simple walls and elaborate mosaics alike. The city seemed to exhale, releasing the energy of the day into the stillness of evening. In that calm, one could hear the soft trickle of fountains, the murmur of the Tiber, and the whispers of neighbors bidding one another good night. Daily life in Rome, in all its simplicity and complexity, formed the true foundation of the empire. It was in these small, steady moments, meals shared, prayers offered, lessons taught, and stories told, that the strength of Rome resided. A civilization is not built only by rulers and soldiers, but by the quiet resilience of its people, whose lives, though ordinary, became extraordinary in their collective endurance. Roman religion and mythology. In the world of ancient Rome, faith and daily life were inseparable, woven together as seamlessly as the threads of a tapestry. To the Romans, the gods were not distant or abstract, but ever present, shaping the harvest, guiding the laws, watching over homes, and walking beside them in both triumph and trial. Religion was not a separate sphere. It was the heartbeat of the city, a calm rhythm that gave meaning, reassurance, and continuity to every moment of existence. The Romans inherited much from their neighbors, the Etruscans to the north, and later, the Greeks, whose myths and gods mingled with their own. Yet Rome shaped these beliefs into something distinctly its own, a religion both practical and profound, designed not only for worship, but for the steady maintenance of harmony between human life and the divine. This balance was known as the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods. To maintain it was considered the most essential duty of both leaders and ordinary citizens alike. Temples rose gently across the city, each dedicated to a god or goddess. The temple of Jupiter, high upon the Capitoline Hill, seemed to gaze out across all of Rome, a reminder of the might of the king of gods. Nearby, the temples of Juno, protector of women, and Minerva, goddess of wisdom, offered places of quiet reflection. These sacred spaces were not only sites of ritual, but also havens of calm, where citizens entered to leave offerings, whisper prayers, and feel the comfort of being watched over by powers greater than themselves. In homes, religion was even more intimate. Household shrines honored the Lares and Penates, guardian spirits of the family and home. A small flame might be lit each morning, bread or fruit placed as an offering, and prayers spoken softly by parents, children, or elders. These rituals did not require grandeur. They were quiet acts of devotion, binding the family together and reminding each member that their lives were part of a greater pattern, stretching back to ancestors and forward to generations yet unborn. Festivals brought moments of joy and reflection, marking the calendar with sacred celebrations. During Saturnalia, the city filled with laughter and merriment as social rules relaxed. Masters dined with servants, and gifts were exchanged under the winter sky. The Floralia honored spring with flowers, games, and bright colors, while the Lupercalia echoed with ancient rites meant to ensure fertility and prosperity. Each festival carried both joy and meaning, giving rhythm to the year and reminding citizens of their bond with the divine. The stories of the gods, Jupiter's thunder, Mars' courage, Venus' beauty, Neptune's restless seas, were not only myths, but lessons. They explained the mysteries of the natural world, the rise and fall of fortune, and the values that shaped Roman identity. These tales were told in forums, in quiet courtyards, and around the hearth, teaching children not only to know the gods, but to understand the virtues and challenges of life itself. Religion also guided Rome's leaders. Before battles, generals sought the favor of the gods through sacrifices and rituals. Before passing laws, priests interpreted omens, watching the flight of birds or the entrails of animals for signs of divine approval. These practices, though strange to modern ears, gave the Romans a sense of certainty, a calm assurance that their actions were aligned with a greater order. For all its grandeur, Roman religion was rooted in something simple, a desire for harmony. Harmony within the family, harmony within the city, harmony between mortals and the divine. It was less about seeking personal salvation and more about maintaining balance, ensuring that each act, whether planting crops, founding colonies, or offering prayers, contributed to the steady flow of life in tune with the will of the gods. As evening fell over Rome, the temples glowed softly with lantern light, and the smoke of sacrifices drifted gently into the sky. Families gathered in their homes, whispering prayers at their shrines, thanking the gods for the day's blessings, and asking for protection through the night. In the stillness, the city seemed wrapped in sacred calm, its people resting not only beneath the watchful stars, but beneath the unseen gaze of their many gods. Roman expansion across Italy. The Rome that began as a small settlement by the Tiber was never destined to remain a quiet town. Like a river that gathers strength as it flows, Rome slowly extended its influence, first across the hills and valleys nearby, then across the length and breadth of the Italian peninsula. This expansion was not sudden or reckless. It unfolded over centuries, a steady, deliberate process that reflected Rome's patience, resilience, and vision of destiny. At first, Rome's neighbors were close at hand, the Etruscans to the north, the Latins nearby, the Sabines in the hills. Each people had their towns, their gods, and their traditions. Often, Rome fought them, sometimes harshly, sometimes with diplomacy, always with the understanding that survival depended on strength. Yet what set Rome apart was not only its victories but the way it wove its rivals into its growing world. Conquered peoples were not always crushed. Instead, they were often offered alliances, rights, and a place, however small, within the Roman system. This approach created something unique, a web of loyalty and cooperation, where former enemies became allies, bound not only by force, but by shared benefits. Roads linked these communities, spreading Roman order and connecting distant villages with the bustling heart of the city. Over time, the people of Italy began to think of themselves not just as Latins or Etruscans, but as part of a larger whole, a growing Roman family. Wars, however, remained a constant rhythm. The Samnite Wars, fought high in the rugged mountains of central Italy, tested Rome's strength and endurance. The Samnites were fierce warriors, skilled in ambushes and mountain fighting, and for a time it seemed as though Rome might falter. Yet Rome's discipline, its ability to adapt, and its tireless determination carried it through. By the war's end, the Samnites, too, were drawn into Rome's orbit, their strength becoming part of the very foundation of the Republic. The south of Italy brought new challenges, for here lay wealthy Greek colonies, glittering with temples, theaters, and art. These cities, known collectively as Magna Graecia, called upon the aid of powerful allies, including King Pyrrhus of Epirus, a seasoned commander from across the sea. His arrival introduced Rome to the style of warfare practiced in the wider Greek world, phalanxes of armored soldiers, war elephants that thundered across the battlefield, and strategies honed against Eastern kings. Pyrrhus won battles, but at great cost, so great, in fact, that his victories became a warning for all time. The phrase Pyrrhic victory was born, describing triumphs so costly they were nearly indistinguishable from defeat. Rome, though bloodied, did not bend. Each setback became a lesson, each defeat a stone upon which greater resilience was built. Eventually, Pyrrhus withdrew, and the Greek cities, one by one, accepted Rome's leadership. By the early 3rd century BCE, Rome had achieved what once seemed unthinkable, mastery over nearly all of Italy. From the fertile plains of the north to the sunlit shores of the south, Rome's influence stretched like the embrace of a vast and patient hand. Yet even here, the Roman genius revealed itself. Unlike other conquerors who ruled through fear alone, Rome integrated. Citizenship, alliances, and shared institutions created bonds that made rebellion rare and loyalty enduring. The expansion across Italy also left its mark on Roman identity. Soldiers returned from campaigns not only with stories of distant lands, but with a sense that Rome was destined for greatness beyond its borders. Roads, aqueducts, and colonies began to extend Roman order far beyond the walls of the city. The Romans, once a single community by the Tiber, now saw themselves as leaders of a confederation that spanned mountains, valleys, and seas. As twilight settled over the peninsula, the vision of Rome was no longer confined to its 7 hills. Fires glowed in distant villages that now answered to Rome. Temples echoed with prayers to Roman gods, and roads stretched like threads of destiny across the land. Italy, once divided, had become the stage upon which Rome prepared for something greater, a future that would reach far beyond its peninsula, into the heart of the Mediterranean world. The Punic Wars. With Italy united under Rome's banner, the Republic stood at a threshold. To the west, across the blue waters of the Mediterranean, lay a rival equal in power, wealth, and ambition. This rival was Carthage, a city of traders, sailors, and merchants, whose harbors bustled with ships from every corner of the known world. Carthage was rich, sophisticated, and strong, with an empire stretching across North Africa, Spain, and the islands of the Western Sea. The collision between Rome and Carthage was inevitable, and when it came, it would shape not only the fate of the Mediterranean, but the destiny of Rome itself. The First Punic War began in 264 BCE, sparked by disputes over Sicily, the fertile island that lay between the two powers like a jewel in the sea. Rome, until then a land power, was forced to become a naval power almost overnight. Carthage's fleets ruled the waves, their sailors seasoned by centuries of trade and war. Rome, in contrast, had little experience at sea, yet the Roman spirit of adaptation was unmatched. By studying captured ships and inventing the corvus, a boarding bridge that turned sea battles into something resembling land battles, Rome began to challenge Carthage where it was strongest. The war dragged on for over 2 decades, marked by storms, shipwrecks, and terrible losses. But slowly, Rome learned. Each defeat became a lesson, each disaster a teacher. By the war's end, Rome emerged victorious, claiming Sicily as its first province beyond the Italian peninsula. The Republic had crossed a threshold. It was no longer just the master of Italy, but now a Mediterranean power. The peace, however, was fragile. Carthage, though wounded, was far from broken. A new leader arose among them, a general whose name would echo in Roman memory for centuries, Hannibal Barca. With a mind as sharp as a blade and a will forged from steel, Hannibal sought to break Rome's growing might. His daring campaign in the Second Punic War remains one of history's most astonishing feats. In 218 BCE, Hannibal led his army, not across the sea, but over the towering Alps. With soldiers, horses, and even elephants, he crossed snowbound mountains that few thought passable. The journey was brutal. Many lives were lost. And yet Hannibal emerged into Italy like a thunderbolt. For years he ravaged the peninsula, winning battle after battle. At Lake Trasimene, his ambush destroyed a Roman army. At Cannae, he delivered a blow so devastating that Roman losses numbered in the tens of thousands. A nightmare of encirclement and annihilation. Rome trembled, but did not collapse. Here lay the heart of the Republic, an unshakable resilience. Even after such staggering defeats, Rome refused to surrender. Year after year, it raised new armies, fortified its cities, and endured. Hannibal roamed Italy for over a decade, but he could not break Rome's spirit or tear its alliances apart. Slowly, Rome turned the tide, sending its own generals abroad. In Spain, Scipio Africanus rose to prominence, matching Hannibal's brilliance with bold strategies of his own. The decisive moment came when Rome carried the war into North Africa itself. Hannibal, recalled to defend his homeland, faced Scipio at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE. It was a clash of titans, and though Hannibal fought with his customary skill, Scipio's tactics proved decisive. Carthage was defeated, forced to surrender much of its territory and power. Rome, scarred but victorious, had emerged as the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. Yet even this was not the end. A third and final Punic War, smaller but brutal, erupted decades later. Carthage, weakened yet still proud, resisted Rome's growing demands. The Romans, led by a generation that had grown up hearing tales of Hannibal's near victories, resolved that Carthage must never again threaten them. In 146 BCE, after a relentless siege, Carthage was destroyed. Its walls were torn down, its harbors burned, its people sold into slavery. the once mighty city of merchants and sailors was reduced to ash, and Rome's supremacy was unchallenged. The Punic Wars were more than battles for territory. They were struggles for destiny. In defeating Carthage, Rome secured not only control of the Mediterranean, but also the confidence to see itself as a power without equal. The Republic had endured storms, defeats, and near ruin. Yet from each trial it had emerged stronger, more disciplined, more certain of its fate. As night settled over the Mediterranean, the waves lapping gently against distant shores, the echoes of the Punic Wars lingered. Carthage, silent in its ruin, was gone, but Rome, tireless and resolute, stood at the threshold of an empire that would one day stretch from the Atlantic to the deserts of the East. Rome's transformation into a Mediterranean empire. When Carthage's ashes cooled and the echoes of Hannibal's war faded, Rome stood alone as the unrivaled master of the Western Mediterranean. Yet power is a tide that never stops rising. With victory came wealth. With wealth came ambition. And with ambition came the reach for lands farther than Roman soldiers had ever dreamed of marching. Rome, once a city-state clinging to the hills of Latium, was becoming something greater, a power whose influence spread across seas and continents, an empire in all but name. The first great step came in the East. The Greek world, fractured by wars among the successors of Alexander the Great, was still rich with cities, culture, and trade. To the Romans, Greece was not only a land of opportunity, but also of fascination. Here were temples that had stood for centuries, theaters filled with poetry, and philosophies that questioned the very nature of existence. Rome, pragmatic and stern, found itself drawn into Greek politics, at first reluctantly, but then with growing determination. At Cynocephalae, in 197 BCE, Roman legions clashed with the phalanxes of Macedon. For centuries, the phalanx, a wall of spears and shields, had dominated battlefields under leaders like Philip II and Alexander. Yet the Roman legion, flexible and disciplined, proved superior. Each cohort could move independently, adjusting to the shifting tides of battle, while the rigid phalanx faltered on uneven ground. Macedon was humbled, and the world took notice. Rome's armies were now unmatched. But Rome did not simply conquer, it absorbed. The Greek world, instead of being crushed, was embraced. Roman generals and senators sent home treasures, manuscripts, and even philosophers to tutor their children. Greek art adorned Roman villas, Greek gods intertwined with Roman ones. Though Rome had triumphed on the battlefield, it was Greece that triumphed in spirit, shaping the culture of the conquerors in ways that would last for centuries. Meanwhile, Rome's gaze extended to Asia Minor and beyond. Kingdoms rose and fell, and each time Rome found itself called as an ally, a protector, and eventually a ruler. Pergamon, a wealthy Hellenistic kingdom, was willed to Rome upon its king's death in 133 BCE. This was a turning point. A vast and prosperous land passed not by conquest, but by inheritance, folding seamlessly into Rome's growing dominion. The Republic now held territory stretching from Spain in the west to the shores of Asia in the east. Wealth poured into the city in a torrent. Grain from Sicily, Spain, and Egypt fed the swelling population. Gold and silver from the mines of Iberia enriched Rome's coffers. Exotic luxuries, silks, perfumes, spices, flowed through its markets, dazzling eyes that had once known only the rough cloth and simple bread of Italy. The Mediterranean had become, as the Romans called it, Mare Nostrum, our sea. Yet beneath the glitter of triumph lay shadows. The influx of wealth widened the gulf between rich and poor. Senators grew wealthy beyond measure, buying vast estates worked by slaves taken in conquest. Meanwhile, small farmers, the backbone of the Republic, struggled to compete and fell into debt. Many abandoned their fields, crowding into the city, where poverty and unrest simmered beneath the marble temples. Rome, in expanding outward, had also begun to strain inward. Its political institutions, designed for a city-state, not a vast empire, struggled to keep pace. The Senate remained the center of power, but corruption and factionalism grew. Ambitious generals saw in Rome's far-flung provinces not only duty, but opportunity, to enrich themselves, to gather loyal soldiers, to one day turn their arms not against foreign enemies, but against rivals at home. And yet, even amid these tensions, Rome thrived. Roads stretched outward like veins, carrying legions, merchants, and messages across thousands of miles. Aqueducts carried fresh water into cities. Arches and amphitheaters rose, proclaiming Rome's might in stone. Roman law began to spread, a framework of order that bound together people of countless languages and traditions. The transformation of Rome into a Mediterranean empire was not a single moment, but a long unfolding. Each war, each treaty, each conquest stitched another piece into the fabric of dominion. By the 2nd century BCE, the Republic had become something greater than even its founders could have imagined, a power whose presence was felt from the Atlantic Ocean to the edges of Asia. And, as the Mediterranean fell under Roman influence, whispers began to stir. Whispers that Rome's greatness carried with it both destiny and danger. For while the Republic had conquered the world, it had not yet conquered itself. The crisis of the Republic. By the 2nd century before the Common Era, Rome stood as the unchallenged power of the Mediterranean world. Its legions marched where they pleased, its fleets sailed across seas once contested, and its wealth poured in from every direction. Yet within the marble temples and bustling streets of the capital, an unease began to stir. The Republic, so strong against enemies abroad, now faced dangers from within, dangers born of its very success. The heart of the crisis lay in the widening divide between rich and poor. Rome's conquests had flooded the city with treasure, slaves, and grain. Senators and nobles acquired vast estates, worked by enslaved laborers captured in war. These latifundia, as they were called, grew wealthy and productive, while small farmers, once the backbone of Rome's armies and society, found themselves unable to compete. Many lost their land, slipping into debt and despair, and drifted to the city in search of work. Rome swelled with these displaced citizens. The narrow streets became crowded, the tenements rose higher, and poverty pressed on every corner. Yet the people still held the right to vote in assemblies, and ambitious politicians soon saw in their misery a path to power. Thus began an age of reformers, demagogues, and civil strife, as men sought to reshape Rome according to their vision of justice or their own ambition. Among the first were the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, sons of a noble family, yet deeply sympathetic to the plight of the common people. They rose to prominence as tribunes of the plebs. Tiberius, in 133 BCE, proposed redistributing land to the poor, limiting the vast estates of the wealthy elite. His plan promised relief to thousands, but it threatened the entrenched power of the Senate. Resistance turned violent. In the forum itself, amid the shouts of a crowd, Tiberius was struck down, the first Roman leader in centuries to be killed by political violence. Yet the flame he lit did not die. His younger brother, Gaius, continued the cause, championing not only land reform, but also grain subsidies and citizenship rights for Rome's Italian allies. His words inspired the masses, but again the Senate bristled. Tensions flared, mobs clashed in the streets, and Gaius too fell to violence. Their deaths marked a turning point. Rome had crossed a line where disagreements once settled by debate could now end in blood. The Senate, meant to guide the Republic with wisdom, grew increasingly divided, torn between factions of optimates, the defenders of aristocratic privilege, and populars who appealed to the people. Elections became battles of influence, bribery, and intimidation. The assemblies, once a symbol of collective power, were manipulated by powerful men who sought only their own rise. And in the provinces, another danger brewed. Governors, appointed to oversee conquered lands, often exploited their positions, extorting wealth and abusing local populations. Far from Rome's scrutiny, they built networks of loyalty among soldiers and allies, amassing fortunes and followers. It was a new kind of power, not the authority of office, but the authority of personal command. The strain also weighed on the army. Once composed of citizen farmers who fought for the Republic and returned to their fields, the legions now filled with men who had no land to call their own. They fought not for the Senate or the people of Rome, but for their generals, who promised them plunder and the hope of land after victory. Slowly, the loyalty of Rome's armies shifted from the state to the individual commander. This fragile balance would lead to men like Gaius Marius, who reformed the army and gave the landless poor a place in its ranks, and later to Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who marched his soldiers on Rome itself, shattering the taboo that had once kept military power outside the sacred city. Through all of this, Rome's dominion continued to expand. New provinces were annexed, new roads were built, new victories celebrated. Outwardly, the Republic seemed unshakable, but beneath its grandeur, the fabric of Roman society was fraying. Political violence, corruption, inequality, and personal ambition began to replace the unity and discipline that had carried Rome to greatness. The crisis of the Republic was not a single moment, but a long unraveling. Each year, the traditions that held Rome together weakened just a little more. Each conflict left behind a scar, and each ambitious leader stretched the limits of power further than before. The Senate struggled to contain these forces, but its authority was slipping, step by step. And so, as the first century before the Common Era dawned, the Republic, mighty, wealthy, and still feared abroad, found itself standing on fragile ground. Its people longed for stability, its generals grasped for power, and the city that had once prided itself on virtue and order drifted ever closer to the storm. Julius Caesar and the fall of the Republic. As the first century before the Common Era unfolded, the Republic's foundations weakened further, and into this age of uncertainty stepped one of history's most remarkable figures, Gaius Julius Caesar. His name, spoken in whispers or in awe, would come to define the end of the Republic and the beginning of something new. Yet his story, though filled with battles and ambition, is also a tale of the fragility of Rome itself, how the mightiest republic of the ancient world could not withstand the weight of its own contradictions. Caesar was born into a patrician family, yet one of modest means compared to the richest senators. From an early age he displayed charm, intelligence, and a gift for words that made him stand out in Roman politics. He knew how to win the hearts of the people, not only through speeches in the forum, but through generosity, games, and promises of reform. Unlike many who clung to the traditions of the Senate, Caesar positioned himself as a popularis, a man of the people. But Rome, in Caesar's youth, was already divided. Power often rested not in the assemblies or Senate debates, but in uneasy alliances between ambitious men. Caesar formed one such alliance, known as the First Triumvirate, with Pompey the Great, Rome's most celebrated general, and Crassus, the wealthiest man in the Republic. Together, they dominated Roman politics, each using his strengths to advance the others. It was Caesar, however, who seized the greatest opportunity. As governor of Gaul, he commanded legions at the edges of the Roman world. There, over years of relentless campaigning, he expanded Rome's frontiers and proved himself a brilliant strategist. His conquest of Gaul brought unimaginable wealth and glory, and the loyalty of soldiers who adored him. Stories spread through Rome of Caesar's daring, his speeches before his men, his ability to share in their hardships, eating the same bread, enduring the same marches. These legions would become his true source of power. Back in Rome, the alliance fractured. Crassus was killed in battle in the east, and Pompey, once Caesar's ally, aligned himself with the Senate against him. Suspicion and fear grew. Caesar's successes made him too powerful, too popular, too dangerous for the old order. The Senate ordered him to give up his command and return to Rome as a private citizen. For Caesar, that meant humiliation and likely prosecution by his enemies. Instead, in 49 BCE, he made a choice that changed history. At the head of his army, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River, a small boundary between his province and Italy itself. To cross it with soldiers was forbidden, an act of treason, of war. Yet, as he stepped onto the far bank, Caesar is said to have uttered words that still echo through time. Alea iacta est, the die is cast. Civil war erupted. Pompey fled to Greece, the Senate divided, and the legions of Rome turned their swords against one another. For years, the struggle raged, from Italy to Egypt to the plains of Africa. At Pharsalus, Caesar's smaller army defeated Pompey's larger force with cunning and discipline. Pompey fled to Egypt, only to be betrayed and killed, his head offered to Caesar as a gift. Though victorious, Caesar did not return to Rome as a mere general. He returned as the unrivaled master of the Republic. The Senate, once proud and independent, now bent to his will. He was appointed dictator, at first for a year, then for 10, and finally for life. He reformed the calendar, relieved debts, and planned great projects. He showed mercy to some of his enemies, sparing lives where others might have taken them. Yet his growing power unsettled many. Rome had prided itself on freedom, on shared rule, on the idea that no single man could dominate the state. With Caesar, that tradition seemed broken. Whispers of conspiracy grew louder. Senators who once called him friend began to see him as a tyrant. They feared that he sought not just the title of dictator, but of king, a word that carried bitter memories for Romans who had cast out their kings centuries before. And so, on the Ides of March, in 44 BCE, as Caesar entered the Senate house, he was surrounded by men he trusted. Knives were drawn, and blow after blow was struck. Among them was Brutus, whom Caesar is said to have regarded as a son. The dictator fell at the foot of Pompey's statue, his lifeblood staining the floor of the republic he had both reshaped and undone. For a moment, the assassins believed they had saved Rome, yet the republic was too fragile, too wounded to heal. Instead, Caesar's death unleashed more chaos, more wars, and in time, the rise of another figure, his adopted heir, Octavian, who would become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The republic, which had endured for centuries, ended not with a single battle, but with the ambitions of men, the cries of citizens for change, and the clash between tradition and destiny. And at its heart stood Julius Caesar, a man whose brilliance and flaws intertwined, leaving behind a legacy that would echo for millennia. Augustus and the Pax Romana. In the aftermath of Julius Caesar's assassination, Rome descended once again into uncertainty. The dream of restoring the old republic faded quickly as rival factions vied for control. Among them rose Caesar's grandnephew and adopted son, Gaius Octavius, known to history as Augustus. Octavian was young, barely 20 years old when Caesar died, but he possessed a calm intelligence and an instinct for power. At first, few took him seriously. Yet step by step he outmaneuvered seasoned generals and senators alike. He formed an alliance with Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted lieutenant, and Lepidus, another powerful commander, creating what came to be known as the Second Triumvirate. Together, they sought to avenge Caesar's death and destroy the conspirators who had struck him down. Brutus and Cassius, the leaders of the assassination, fled east, but at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, Octavian and Antony's forces crushed them. The dream of reviving the Republic died on that battlefield. Yet the alliance that had won the war soon unraveled. Lepidus was pushed aside, leaving Octavian and Antony as rivals for supreme power. Antony's path led him to Egypt, where he became entwined with the legendary Queen Cleopatra. To many in Rome, this alliance seemed dangerous, a betrayal of Roman traditions. Octavian seized the moment, portraying himself as the defender of Rome against Eastern corruption. The stage was set for one final conflict. In 31 BCE, at the Battle of Actium, Octavian's fleet, commanded by his Admiral Agrippa, defeated Antony and Cleopatra. The lovers fled to Egypt, where their story ended in tragedy, with both taking their own lives. Octavian returned to Rome as the sole master of the Roman world, yet he was careful. Rome still feared kingship, and he did not declare himself monarch. Instead, in 27 BCE, he took the title Augustus, meaning the revered one. He presented himself as the first citizen, not a tyrant, yet all true power rested in his hands. The Republic was gone, though its forms remained as a veil over the new reality, the Roman Empire. Under Augustus, Rome entered an age of remarkable stability and prosperity, later called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For 2 centuries, the empire would know relative calm, its borders secured by legions, its cities flourishing with trade, art, and architecture. Augustus reformed the laws, built temples and aqueducts, and encouraged literature that celebrated Rome's destiny. It was in his time that the poet Virgil wrote the Aeneid, linking Rome's founding to the will of the gods and the glory of Augustus himself. For ordinary Romans, life seemed steadier. Roads stretched across the empire, binding together lands from Spain to Syria. Merchants carried goods and ideas across thousands of miles. Farmers found security in the stability Augustus offered, while soldiers swore loyalty not to the Senate, but to the emperor. Yet this peace came at a cost. Freedom of speech narrowed, opposition was silenced, and all decisions ultimately flowed from one man. Still, Augustus ruled with patience and skill, avoiding the mistakes of Caesar. By the time of his death in 14 CE, Rome had been transformed. The Republic had become memory, and the Empire had become reality. And so, beneath the marble monuments and bustling streets of the Eternal City, a new age dawned, an age that promised peace, but also bound Rome's destiny to the will of emperors yet to come. Daily life in the Roman Empire. To truly understand the Roman Empire, one must look not only at its emperors, battles, and monuments, but also at the rhythm of daily life that pulsed through its streets, villages, and countryside. Beyond the Senate halls and military triumphs, millions of ordinary men, women, and children shaped the empire simply by living, working, and dreaming. In the heart of Rome, the day often began at dawn. The city stirred awake with the calls of vendors setting up their stalls in crowded markets. Bakers fired their ovens, filling the air with the warm, earthy scent of fresh bread. Water carriers hauled jars from fountains, while blacksmiths clanged hammers against iron, their sparks leaping like fireflies into the early light. The streets were noisy, narrow, and alive, with carts rumbling and neighbors greeting one another in hurried voices. For the wealthy elite, mornings were slower, shaded by the cool atriums of their villas. Their homes, adorned with colorful mosaics and painted walls, offered a retreat from the bustle outside. Wealthy Romans might begin the day with a light meal, bread, cheese, or fruit, before holding audiences with clients. Thus clients, often less wealthy men, visited to seek favors, money, or political support, a practice that tied together the social fabric of patron and dependent. The poor, however, lived very differently. Many resided in insula, tall apartment blocks made of brick and wood. These buildings were cramped and often dangerous, with thin walls, little light, and a constant risk of fire. Families shared small rooms, cooking simple meals of porridge, beans, or bread. Yet life was not without its joys. Even the poorest Romans found entertainment in the city's public baths, where, for a small fee, they could wash, socialize, and relax in warm pools of water. The baths were a cornerstone of Roman daily life. They were not simply places to bathe, but hubs of conversation, business, and leisure. Citizens would move from the hot, steamy rooms to cooler pools, exercising in courtyards or strolling beneath colonnades. Here, senators and laborers alike might brush shoulders, for the baths were open to all, regardless of wealth or status. Beyond the baths, the amphitheater offered another escape. Gladiatorial games, though brutal, were wildly popular. Crowds gathered in vast arenas like the Colosseum to watch men, and sometimes women, fight for survival. For Romans, these spectacles were not only entertainment, but also demonstrations of courage, discipline, and the glory of Rome itself. Chariot races at the circus. Maximus drew even larger crowds, where the thunder of horses and the cries of cheering fans shook the ground like distant storms. Yet not every Roman sought excitement. In the countryside, life followed the gentle cycles of the seasons. Farmers rose with the sun, tending to fields of wheat, olives, or grapes. Villages bustled with local markets, and religious festivals marked the turning of the year. The rural life was simpler, yet it was the backbone of Rome, for it was the farms that fed the empire's countless mouths. Religion also shaped daily existence. Shrines to household gods, known as lares and penates, stood in kitchens and courtyards. Families lit small fires or offered food to these protective spirits, seeking blessings for health and prosperity. Across the empire, temples stood as reminders of Rome's devotion to its gods, though many Romans blended old traditions with new ones from the lands they conquered. Despite vast differences in wealth, Romans shared certain rhythms: the meals of bread, wine, and olives, the laughter of festivals, the murmur of prayers whispered at shrines, and the comforting presence of community. Life in Rome could be harsh and uncertain, yet it also offered moments of connection, beauty, and joy. As night fell, oil lamps flickered in narrow streets, and the city slowly quieted. Merchants closed their shops, farmers returned from the fields, and families gathered in small, smoky rooms to share stories or simply rest. Above them, the stars spread across the Italian sky, watching silently over a people whose daily struggles and simple pleasures sustained one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. Roman religion and the world of the gods. Religion was the quiet heartbeat of Roman life, woven into the fabric of daily routines, political ceremonies, and the grand spectacles of the empire. For the Romans, the gods were everywhere. In the rustle of leaves, the flow of rivers, the flame of a hearth. They were guardians, judges, and companions, watching over humanity with a power both comforting and fearsome. At the center of Roman religion stood the great pantheon of deities, many borrowed and reshaped from the Greeks. Jupiter, king of the gods, ruled the heavens, his thunderbolts a symbol of strength and justice. Beside him was Juno, protector of marriage and women, and Minerva, goddess of wisdom and strategy. Mars, fierce and unyielding, embodied the Roman spirit of war, while Venus, radiant and gentle, represented love, beauty, and desire. Yet religion in Rome was not only about lofty Olympian gods. It was intimate and domestic, centered in the home as much as in great temples. Every Roman household honored lares and penates, the protective spirits of family and food supply. In kitchens and courtyards, small shrines glowed with oil lamps, as families whispered prayers, offering wine, bread, or a pinch of incense to safeguard their homes. Beyond the family, the state itself was steeped in religion. Festivals filled the Roman calendar, ensuring nearly every month was touched by ritual and celebration. During Saturnalia, held in honor of Saturn, roles reversed. Slaves and masters dined together, gifts were exchanged, and laughter filled the streets in a rare time of equality and joy. At other times, solemn processions wound through the city, with priests dressed in white robes leading sacrifices of oxen or sheep, their prayers rising in smoke toward the heavens. The Romans also believed deeply in omens and divination. Ogres, special priests, studied the flight of birds to interpret the will of the gods. Haruspices examined the entrails of sacrificed animals, searching for signs of approval or warning. Even the most powerful emperors, before launching wars or building monuments, sought divine approval through these sacred practices. To ignore the gods was to invite misfortune. for Rome's greatness was thought to rest on their favor. As the empire expanded, Roman religion absorbed new beliefs and practices from conquered lands. Egyptian gods like Isis found temples in the heart of Rome. The Persian god Mithras, worshipped in secretive underground shrines, gained followers among soldiers who admired his values of loyalty and courage. This blending of traditions gave Roman spirituality a unique richness, as old rituals intertwined with new mysteries. In the midst of this spiritual variety, one goddess held a place of special reverence, Vesta, guardian of the sacred flame. Her fire, tended by the Vestal virgins in the heart of Rome, symbolized the eternal life of the city. As long as the flame burned, Rome would endure. The Vestals, chosen as children and bound to decades of service, embodied purity and devotion, their quiet lives reflecting the sacred heart of the empire. For ordinary Romans, religion offered not only protection but also comfort. Life in the empire was uncertain. Wars, disease, and hardship were constant companions. Through prayer, ritual, and belief, people felt they could reach beyond their struggles to touch something eternal. Whether through the roar of a festival, the soft glow of a household shrine, or the distant thunder that reminded them of Jupiter's power, Romans lived in a world alive with divine presence. As the empire grew older, new faiths emerged that would challenge the old gods and reshape the spiritual heart of Rome. But in its golden age, the empire's identity was inseparable from its religion. The gods, both mighty and humble, walked beside the people, their names whispered in prayers, their symbols carved into stone, their power flowing through the eternal city. And so, as the Roman night descended and oil lamps flickered in homes and temples alike, the people rested under the watchful eyes of their gods, secure in the belief that Rome was not only a city of men, but a realm protected and guided by the divine. The Roman army and the power of discipline. No story of Rome would be complete without its legions, the disciplined, unyielding heart of the empire. From the earliest days of the Republic, Roman soldiers were more than fighters. They were architects of conquest, builders of roads and bridges, and the living embodiment of Rome's order and strength. Their power shaped the fate of kingdoms and the lives of millions. The Roman army was organized with remarkable precision. A legion, typically consisting of around 5,000 men, was divided into cohorts, centuries, and maniples, each with its own officers and responsibilities. Soldiers trained relentlessly, drilling until movements became instinct, shields and swords moving as one in perfect harmony. The flexibility of this structure allowed Rome to triumph against enemies who relied on brute force or rigid formations, from the Greek phalanx to the cavalry of Gaul. Discipline was the soul of the army. Soldiers obeyed orders without question, knowing that hesitation could cost lives, their own and their comrades. Punishments for disobedience were severe, yet the rewards were great. Service brought pay, land grants, and a sense of belonging to something larger than oneself. The bonds between men, forged through long marches, harsh winters, and relentless campaigns, were as strong as any family. Beyond the battlefield, the legions shaped the empire itself. When not fighting, soldiers built roads, forts, aqueducts, and bridges. These projects connected distant provinces to Rome, facilitating trade, communication, and the movement of armies. The roads they carved through forests, mountains, and deserts became arteries of civilization, and many are still visible today, testament to the meticulous engineering and enduring presence of Rome. Life in the army was arduous. Soldiers faced hunger, fatigue, disease, and the constant threat of battle. Yet camaraderie and the promise of honor sustained them. Camps were meticulously organized, tents arranged in neat rows, sentries posted at night, and daily routines followed with unwavering precision. Soldiers practiced combat skills, maintained weapons, and engaged in physical training that tested strength, endurance, and willpower. Rome's military might also rested on strategy and leadership. Generals studied terrain, weather, and the habits of their enemies, planning campaigns with patience and foresight. Famous commanders, from Scipio Africanus to Julius Caesar, demonstrated that brilliance in leadership could turn the tide of war, even against overwhelming odds. Victory was as much the product of planning and discipline as courage and valor. The army was not just a tool of conquest. It was a pillar of Roman identity. Soldiers carried Roman laws, customs, and culture to distant lands. In provinces from Britain to Egypt, military camps became towns. Markets grew around forts, and local populations adapted to Roman ways of life. Latin, Roman law, and Roman religion spread alongside the eagle of the legion, leaving a legacy that endured long after the soldiers returned home. Even in times of peace, the legions remained vigilant. Their presence discouraged rebellion, maintained order, and reminded conquered peoples of Rome's might. They were the guardians of an empire built not only on conquest, but on the promise of stability, organization, and discipline. And as the sun set on the camps scattered across the empire, torches flickering against stone walls, soldiers rested beneath the stars, their hearts steady, their minds alert. Rome slept, but its legions, the ever-watchful guardians of its destiny, ensured that the empire's heartbeat would continue, steady, enduring, eternal. Trade, roads, and the flow of wealth. While legions defended and expanded the Roman Empire, another force quietly bound its vast territories together: trade and infrastructure. From the bustling streets of Rome to distant provinces at the edges of the known world, commerce and communication created a network that sustained the empire's power and prosperity. The foundation of this system was the Roman road. Miles of carefully engineered stone highways stretched across hills, plains, and deserts, connecting cities, forts, and ports. These roads allowed soldiers to march swiftly, officials to travel efficiently, and merchants to transport goods safely. Inns and way stations provided rest and food, ensuring that travelers and caravans could move steadily, day after day, mile after mile. The phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," was no exaggeration. The empire itself radiated from the capital along these arteries of stone. Trade flowed along these roads and across the seas. Ships carried grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, olive oil from Hispania, and exotic spices from the far reaches of the empire. Markets in cities and towns overflowed with goods, pottery, textiles, jewelry, and rare imports that reminded Romans of the empire's vast reach. Money changed hands, deals were struck, and the hum of commerce filled every port and forum. Rome's economic system was remarkably organized. Coinage standardized trade, while warehouses and granaries stored vital provisions. Taxes, though sometimes burdensome, funded roads, aqueducts, and public buildings. Wealth flowed from provinces to the capital, but also radiated outward, enriching merchants, craftsmen, and ordinary citizens. In a sense, trade itself became a silent glue that held the empire together, linking distant lands through shared interests and mutual reliance. The exchange of goods also brought an exchange of ideas and culture. Art, literature, and technology traveled alongside merchandise. Roman architecture and law influenced distant provinces, while foreign customs, foods, and artistic styles enriched Roman life. The empire was, in this way, a living network of human creativity and connection, united not only by conquest, but by commerce. In the countryside, farmers produced the raw materials that fed both city and army. Olive groves, vineyards, wheat fields, and pastures formed the backbone of the economy. Agricultural practices improved over time, incorporating irrigation, crop rotation, and careful planning. Farmers, merchants, and artisans alike contributed to the steady rhythm of Rome's wealth and growth. Even the Mediterranean Sea became a highway of trade. Ships, guided by stars and knowledge of winds and currents, carried goods, soldiers, and news. Ports like Ostia and Alexandria thrived as bustling hubs where merchants from many lands met, bartered, and built fortunes. The ebb and flow of ships mirrored the heartbeat of the empire itself, constant, measured, and enduring. Yet trade was not without risk. Pirates prowled the coasts, storms threatened sailors, and political unrest could disrupt routes. Still, the Romans invested in security, patrolled the seas, and maintained roads, ensuring that commerce, like the empire, endured. And so, as the sun set across the vast territories of Rome, merchants closed their shops. Farmers rested under the warm glow of the evening sky, and caravans found shelter at roadside inns. The roads and waterways, silent yet purposeful, continued to connect people, wealth, and ideas. The empire's heartbeat, its trade, its infrastructure, and its flow of wealth carried on, steady and unbroken, a testament to the ingenuity, order, and enduring legacy of Rome. Rome, eternal in its spirit, rested under the stars, secure in the knowledge that its roads, its markets, and its people would sustain its power long into the centuries to come.